Snap, silly whore. What did you in there with my husband? You were cheating on me on the flight? You idiot!
The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 847 reached cruising altitude over the Atlantic. I settled into my first-class seat, exhausted from the medical conference in London, eager to get home to Boston. My husband Marcus was flying tonight. I'd seen his name on the roster when I booked. After 15 years of marriage, I still got a small thrill knowing he was at the controls, that somewhere beyond that reinforced cockpit door, his steady hands were guiding us through the darkness at 500 miles per hour. I closed my eyes, letting the engine's hum lull me toward sleep. The conference had been draining. 3 days of presentations and networking events, where I'd smiled until my face ached. All I wanted was to get home, crawl into bed, and maybe, just maybe, have an honest conversation with Marcus about the distance that had grown between us like a canyon over the past 6 months. Then I heard her laugh. Before the story continues, please hit the subscribe button and like. That's how you keep us going. Thank you. Now, the story continues. It was bright, crystalline, unmistakable. The same laugh I'd heard on Marcus's phone 3 weeks ago, when he thought I was asleep, when I'd gone downstairs for water and heard him on the back porch, his voice low and intimate, in a way he hadn't spoken to me in years. The same laugh from the voice that had whispered, "I can't wait to see you in London," before he'd noticed me standing in the doorway and ended the call abruptly, claiming it was just a crew member discussing schedules. My eyes snapped open. There she was, gliding down the aisle in her crisp navy uniform. Sienna, the new senior flight attendant Marcus had mentioned casually over dinner 2 months ago. Smart girl, he'd said. Really professional. The airline's lucky to have her. Young, beautiful, with auburn hair twisted into an elegant bun, and a smile that could sell safety demonstrations to the most nervous flyer. She disappeared into the forward galley, near the cockpit, and I watched the subtle sway of her hips, the confidence in her stride. She knew these aisles like Marcus knew flight patterns. She belonged here in a way I never would, sharing his world of time zones and crew layovers, and the particular intimacy that comes from working together at 30,000 feet. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a reminder of my own foolishness. I shouldn't have come on this flight. I should have confronted him before he left for London, should have demanded the truth when I'd seen the hotel receipt in his jacket pocket, a receipt for a room he'd never mentioned, on a layover that should have been in the crew hotel. But I'd wanted to see for myself, to catch them together, to confirm what I'd been denying for weeks, because acknowledging it meant facing the end of everything I'd built my adult life around. 20 minutes passed. 30. The seatbelt sign remained off. Most passengers dozed or watched movies in the darkness, trusting that the pilots at the controls were focused solely on keeping them safe, never imagining what might be happening behind that locked door. I'd read the reports, knew the statistics on pilot error, on distraction, on the human factors that caused disasters. Marcus knew them too. He'd built his entire career on discipline and focus, on being the steady hand that passengers bet their lives on. And yet, then Sienna emerged from the cockpit, her lipstick slightly smudged, her face flushed in a way that had nothing to do with the recycled cabin air. She smoothed her uniform, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and walked past me without a glance, radiating guilt like perfume. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her collar, and I saw it, the tiny hickey just below her jawline, partially covered by makeup, but visible in the dim light if you knew where to look. something snapped inside me. It wasn't a conscious decision, not a moment where I weighed consequences and chose a path. It was more primitive than that. A flooding of my system with rage and humiliation and betrayal, so complete that rational thought simply ceased to exist. 15 years. 15 years of supporting his career moves, of solo parenting during his long hauls, of rearranging my own medical practice schedule around his unpredictable roster. 15 years of believing we were building something together, that the sacrifices meant something, that the loneliness was temporary and would be worth it when he made captain and we could finally breathe. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood, my hands trembling with rage and adrenaline. The other flight attendants were busy in the back galley, probably preparing for the mid-flight service. No one noticed as I approached the cockpit door, my reflection ghostly in the darkened window beside it. I looked haggard, older than my 42 years, with circles under my eyes and lines around my mouth that hadn't been there when Marcus and I had married in that little church in Vermont, both of us so young and stupid and certain that love would be enough. I knew the protocol. I knew Marcus would be expecting her return, that he'd unlock the door without checking the security camera, because he'd grown careless in his arrogance. I knocked. 3 short raps. Too long. Their secret signal I'd discovered in a text message that had popped up on his iPad while he was in the shower. Use our signal, it had said. James falls asleep by hour 2. The door unlocked with a soft click. I stepped inside. Marcus turned, expecting Sienna's smile, probably expecting another kiss or whispered promise. Instead, he found his wife's tear-streaked face, contorted with fury, backlit by the instrument panel's glow, like something from a nightmare. Rachel. His face went white, all the blood draining so fast I thought he might faint. How did you? On this flight? I finished, my voice deadly quiet. Watching you destroy our marriage at 30,000 feet? Watching you risk everything we built for some 25-year-old with good legs and a bright smile. The co-pilot, James, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly fascinated by his instruments. He was younger than Marcus, maybe 30, and the embarrassment radiating from him was almost palpable. He'd probably known, maybe even covered for them, traded shifts or looked the other way during those long layovers. "This isn't the place," Marcus started, standing slowly, his captain's voice trying to assert authority even as his personal life imploded. "Isn't the place?" My voice rose to a shriek, 15 years of suppressed resentment pouring out. "You just had her in here, in the cockpit, while you're responsible for 300 lives, while I'm sitting out there like an idiot, trusting you, believing in you." Marcus moved toward me, hands raised in what might have been a calming gesture or surrender. "Rachel, please, you need to calm down. We can talk about this on the ground. I'll explain everything." "Don't you dare tell me to calm down." The words exploded from me. "Don't you dare use that patronizing pilot voice on me like I'm some hysterical passenger." I shoved him, hard, all my weight behind it, wanting to hurt him the way he'd hurt me. He stumbled backward, his hip catching the edge of his seat. His hand shot out reflexively, grabbing the control yoke for balance, yanking it sharply to the left. The plane lurched violently, banking at an angle that sent everything not secured sliding across surfaces. The artificial horizon on the display spun wildly. In the cabin behind us, screams erupted, high-pitched and terrified. Overhead bins rattled ominously. A laptop someone had left unsecured went flying. The master caution alarm blared its urgent warning, filling the cockpit with sound that cut through my rage like a knife. "Move!" James grabbed the controls, fighting to level the aircraft. His voice no longer embarrassed, but sharp with command. "Get her out of here, now!" But I was beyond reason, beyond hearing, beyond anything except the white-hot fury that had consumed every rational thought. 15 years of devotion, of supporting his career through every setback and triumph, of sitting through his mother's passive-aggressive comments about how I should have been home more, should have given them grandchildren, should have been a better wife. 15 years of lonely nights waiting for him to come home, of canceled anniversaries and missed birthdays, of sleeping alone and waking alone and telling myself it was all for something bigger than my own needs. All of it combusted into pure, blinding rage that had nowhere to go except outward, explosive and destructive. I lunged at Marcus again, clawing at his uniform, wanting to mark him somehow, to make the pain inside visible on the outside. He caught my wrists, but I twisted free, and just as the cockpit door burst open behind us, my peripheral vision registered Sienna's horrified face. "You," I snarled, turning toward her like a predator spotting prey. "You knew he was married. You knew about me, and you didn't care." In that moment of distraction, as I wheeled to face her, my elbow slammed into the throttle levers with my full body weight behind it, yanking them backward with brutal force. The engines immediately began to spool down, their steady roar diminishing to something quieter, something wrong. The nose dipped sharply forward as the aircraft lost thrust. Physics took over. We were a metal tube weighing 300,000 pounds, suddenly without the power keeping us airborne. "Throttles!" James shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Marcus, throttles! Throttles!" The plane was diving now, the angle steepening with every second. In the cabin, passengers weren't just screaming anymore. They were shrieking, praying, the sounds of people who knew they were about to die. Carry-on bags tumbled from overhead compartments. A flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, trying to sound calm but failing utterly. "Brace positions. Everyone brace. The ground proximity warning system activated, its mechanical voice cutting through the chaos with deadly certainty. Pull up, pull up, pull up." Over and over, relentless, each repetition a countdown to disaster. Marcus finally snapped into action. He grabbed me around the waist, his arms like steel bands, physically hauling me away from the controls. "James, you have the aircraft. I have the aircraft." James's voice was ice now. All panic burned away by training and adrenaline. His hands flew across the panel, advancing the throttles forward, pulling back on the yoke with both hands, fighting physics and momentum and the terrible reality that we were falling from the sky at a rate that might already be unrecoverable. Sienna grabbed my arms, her face white with terror, helping Marcus drag me toward the door. I fought them both, screaming obscenities, my mind fractured by betrayal and rage, and the dawning realization of what I'd done. My own voice sounded foreign to me, animal-like, coming from somewhere deep and primal where civilization hadn't reached. The cabin was chaos. Oxygen masks had deployed, dangling from the ceiling like yellow flowers of doom. People were crying, praying in multiple languages, clutching each other and their children. A woman across the aisle was vomiting from terror. 2 male passengers rushed forward to help restrain me, their faces twisted with fear and anger. They thought I was a terrorist, a hijacker, Someone trying to kill them all. They had no idea I was just a wife who'd loved too much and been betrayed too deeply. Marcus finally wrestled me through the cockpit door. "Hold her! Don't let her back in!" he commanded the passengers helping him. And then he was gone, sealing himself back inside with James, leaving me in a cabin full of people who'd just watched me nearly murder them all. Through the reinforced door, I could hear James's clipped, professional voice, the kind of calm that only comes from years of training for disasters you pray will never happen. Boston Center, Flight 847, declaring an emergency. "We've had an unauthorized person in the cockpit. Significant control disruption. Requesting immediate clearance for emergency landing at Halifax. Souls on board, 312. Fuel remaining, 4 hours." The words unauthorized person hit me like a slap. I wasn't Rachel anymore, wasn't Marcus's wife, wasn't even fully human in that moment. I was a threat, a statistic waiting to happen, another case study for future pilots to learn from in their safety training. Reality crashed over me like ice water, shocking me back to consciousness. What had I done? 300 innocent people, children sleeping in their parents' arms, families heading home from vacations, business travelers with people waiting for them, strangers whose names I'd never know, all nearly killed because I couldn't control my rage for 30 seconds. 30 seconds of letting my pain matter more than their lives. I stopped struggling. The passengers holding me cautiously loosened their grip, but stayed close, ready to tackle me if I moved wrong. Around me, people stared with unconcealed hatred. A mother clutched her toddler, whose face was streaked with tears, and looked at me like I was a monster. She was right. In that moment, I had been. Sienna stood a few feet away, mascara streaking her face in dark rivers, her carefully maintained beauty destroyed by terror. She was shaking, whether from fear or shock or guilt, I couldn't tell. Maybe all three. She looked younger now, more vulnerable, and I felt a strange pang of something that might have been pity if I'd had any emotional capacity left for anything except horror at myself. "Is he going to tell them?" I whispered, my voice hoarse from screaming. "That it was me?" She said nothing, just stared at me with a mixture of fear and pity and something else I couldn't identify. Disgust, maybe. Or recognition. The recognition of another woman who'd let a man destroy her judgment. The plane was still descending, but more gradually now. Through the windows, I could see we'd dropped below the clouds. The ocean was visible, dark and vast, dotted with the lights of ships that looked impossibly small. James had recovered some control, but I could feel the uncertainty in the aircraft's movements, the way it wasn't quite responding normally. Had I damaged something? Had my moment of madness broken something critical? A flight attendant I didn't recognize, an older woman with gray streaks in her hair, and the bearing of someone who'd seen everything, came forward with plastic restraints. "I need you to sit down," she said quietly, not unkindly. "And I need to secure your hands. You understand why?" I nodded mutely and let her lead me to a seat near the back, away from the other passengers. She zip-tied my wrists together with practiced efficiency, checking that they weren't too tight, but were certainly secure. Around me, people whispered and stared. A man in a business suit was recording me on his phone. By tomorrow, my face would be everywhere. Another cautionary tale about what happens when ordinary people snap. The 30 minutes until landing were the longest of my life. James managed to stabilize the aircraft, but I could feel the tension in every movement, the careful way he was handling the controls. The damage was done, Not just to the plane, but to everything else. 312 people would carry this fear with them forever. Every time they boarded a plane, they'd remember the day someone breached the cockpit and sent them into a death spiral over the Atlantic. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, steady and professional. "Marcus, ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hayes. We've resolved the emergency situation and are making an unscheduled landing in Halifax as a precautionary measure. Emergency services will meet the aircraft, but I want to assure you that we have full control and expect a normal landing. We apologize for the distress this has caused, and we thank you for your cooperation and patience." His voice never wavered, never betrayed the personal catastrophe happening alongside the professional one. That was Marcus, always able to compartmentalize, to separate the man from the captain. It was one of the things I'd loved about him, once. Now it felt like proof of how easily he could wall off his emotions, how effortlessly he could keep me in a separate box from the rest of his life. I stared out the window at the approaching lights of Halifax, a city I'd never planned to visit, that would now be forever seared into my memory. The flight attendants were moving through the cabin, checking on passengers, offering water and reassurance. Children were still crying. An elderly man was being tended to by someone who identified themselves as a doctor. He'd apparently had some kind of cardiac event during the dive. More blood on my hands, more consequences spiraling outward from my 30 seconds of madness. The woman next to me, she'd been moved there by the flight attendants, probably to keep me under observation, kept her body angled away, pressed against the window as if proximity to me might be contagious. She was maybe 60, with perfectly styled silver hair and diamond earrings that caught the light. The kind of woman who'd lived a careful life, who'd probably never broken a rule more serious than a parking ticket. She radiated disapproval like heat. "I have grandchildren on this plane," she said quietly, not looking at me. My daughter and her 2 boys rose up. They're 6 and 8. They were supposed to be thinking about what toys they'd play with when they got home, not whether they were about to die. The words landed like physical blows. I wanted to defend myself, to explain about Marcus and Sienna, about the betrayal and the pain. But what defense could there be? Those children didn't care about my marriage. Their terror was real, and my justification was meaningless. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Completely inadequate. "I'm so sorry." She finally looked at me, her eyes hard. "Sorry doesn't fix trauma. Those boys will have nightmares for years. My daughter is back there sedated because she had a panic attack so severe they thought she was having a heart attack. Sorry is just a word." She was right, of course. Sorry was just a word, and I'd have to live with what I'd done to all these people, strangers whose lives I'd violated with my rage. The weight of it was crushing, making it hard to breathe, and for a moment I understood why Marcus had kept his affair. If that's what it was, hidden. Not to protect me, but because once you've done something terrible, the burden of guilt becomes almost unbearable. Almost. He'd still done it, still made his choices. This wasn't on me alone. But what I'd done in that cockpit, that was entirely mine. The descent continued, agonizingly slow. Through the intercom system, I could occasionally hear fragments of radio communication between James and air traffic control, the technical language of crisis management. 347, reduce speed to 180 knots. Copy, 180 knots. The steady back and forth of professionals doing their jobs, holding together the framework of safety I'd nearly shattered. Sienna appeared in my peripheral vision, still shaking, talking urgently to the senior flight attendant. I caught fragments. X. Glup. Didn't know she was on board. ... He said they were separated. ... He said they were separated. Maybe in his mind, the emotional distance between us counted as separation. Maybe he'd convinced himself, and her, that our marriage was already over, that he was just hastening an inevitable conclusion. Or maybe it was just a lie, the kind men tell mistresses to make the betrayal easier to swallow. The lights of Halifax grew closer, bright spots in the darkness, civilization and safety and consequences. I could see the airport now, the runway lights like a strand of jewels, and surrounding the landing area, visible even from this distance, were emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, their lights creating a pulsing red and blue perimeter. They were ready for the worst, ready for us to come in broken, ready to extract bodies from twisted metal. James managed to stabilize the approach. I felt the landing gear deploy with a heavy thunk that reverberated through the cabin. The flaps extended. All the normal procedures of landing, except nothing about this was normal. We were coming in too fast. I could feel it. The urgency in how James was handling the aircraft. He didn't trust it completely. Couldn't be sure what damage had been done when I'd slammed those throttles back. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Marcus's voice came over the intercom. Then, in an unusual addition, brace positions on my command. That was bad. That meant he didn't know if we'd land cleanly, if the aircraft would respond properly when the wheels touched tarmac. That meant everyone needed to be ready for impact, for the possibility that we'd skid off the runway, or that something critical would fail at the worst possible moment. Brace, brace, brace! The call came from multiple flight attendants simultaneously, a choreographed response to crisis. Around me, people assumed the position, heads down, hands clasped behind their necks, bodies curved forward. The woman next to me was crying silently, her shoulders shaking. Somewhere behind us, a child was asking why we had to do this. Mommy said we were safe now. Mommy promised. I braced too, my zip-tied hands making the position awkward. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was preparing to survive a crash I'd nearly caused, protecting a life I'd just proven I didn't deserve. The runway rushed up to meet us. I saw the threshold lights, the painted numbers, and then felt the jarring impact as the wheels hit tarmac, harder than any landing I'd ever experienced. The plane bounced slightly, settled, bounced again. The engines roared in reverse thrust. The brakes engaged with a screaming protest of stressed metal. We were slowing, but too fast. The emergency vehicles chasing us as we taxied, ready to respond to fire or explosion, or any of the 100 things that could still go wrong. But nothing exploded. Nothing broke. Somehow, impossibly, we were down and intact and alive. The cabin erupted in sound, crying, thanking God in multiple languages. Nervous laughter born of relief, so intense it bordered on hysteria. People were hugging strangers, clutching their children, calling loved ones even though we hadn't reached the gate. Rules forgotten in the aftermath of survival. The plane finally stopped. Not at a gate, but on a remote part of the tarmac, surrounded by emergency vehicles. Through the window, I could see firefighters in full gear, paramedics ready with stretchers, and behind them, marked police cars with officers waiting to board. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Marcus's voice came over the intercom one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Halifax. Please remain seated until instructed by the cabin crew. Emergency personnel will be boarding the aircraft. We apologize again for this incident, and thank you for your cooperation. The door opened. Cool Canadian air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of jet fuel and sea salt. The first to board were paramedics, heading immediately to the elderly man who'd had the cardiac event, and to the woman who'd had the panic attack. Someone's daughter, someone's mother, broken by my actions. Then came the police officers, 4 of them, faces grim and professional. They headed straight for me. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." The lead officer was middle-aged, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his role. He helped me stand, my legs shaky beneath me. Around us, passengers watched with expressions ranging from satisfaction to pity to pure hatred. "My bag," I said stupidly, gesturing toward my carry-on in the overhead bin. "We'll take care of it. Let's go." They escorted me down the aisle, past rows of people I'd traumatized, past flight attendants whose professional masks had slipped to show exhaustion and shock, past Sienna, who looked away as I passed, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. At the cockpit door, I paused. It was open now, no longer a barrier. Inside, I could see Marcus and James, both still in their seats, being questioned by what looked like airline management and aviation safety investigators. Marcus's shoulders were slumped in a way I'd never seen before, all his captain's authority drained away. He looked up as I passed, and our eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that moment, I saw everything there: anger, disappointment, betrayal. He felt betrayed by me, which would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. And beneath it all, the death of whatever love had survived his affair. Whatever we'd been, whatever we might have salvaged through counseling or forgiveness or time, it was gone now, obliterated as thoroughly as if that plane had hit the ocean. Then the police were guiding me forward, down the stairs, to the tarmac where more officers waited. The cool night air hit my face, and I realized I was crying. Had been crying for who knows how long. Silent tears that streamed down my face unchecked. They led me to a police car. I'd seen this scene 1,000 times in movies and television, but living it was different. The way the officer's hand guided my head down so I wouldn't hit it on the doorframe. The smell of the car's interior. The cage separating front from back. The absolute finality of the door closing. Through the window, I watched the passengers deplaning. Some walking under their own power, others being helped. Children clutched their parents' hands, still wide-eyed with fear. I watched one little boy, maybe 7 years old, his face pale and streaked with dried tears, pause at the top of the stairs and look back at the plane, as if it were a monster that had tried to swallow him. His mother urged him forward gently, but he kept looking back, traumatized in a way that would probably never fully heal. They led him away, and then I watched Marcus emerge from the aircraft. He was flanked by men in suits, airline management, probably, or FAA investigators, their expressions grave. He'd removed his captain's hat, held it in one hand, while the other raked through his hair in a gesture I recognized from 15 years of marriage. It's what he did when he was overwhelmed, when the walls he built were threatening to collapse. An investigator approached him on the tarmac, clipboard in hand. I couldn't hear the conversation through the closed car window, but I could see Marcus's face, could read his body language, the way you can read someone you've lived with for half your adult life. He was being asked to explain what happened up there, to account for the security breach that had nearly killed 300 people. His career hung in the balance. His reputation, built over 20 years of flawless service. His future. Everything could be saved with the right words. Pilot error, mechanical failure, unprecedented turbulence, an unstable passenger who somehow breached security. He could make me the villain of this story completely, and no one would question it. I was already the villain. I'd earned that role. I waited for him to point at the police car, to identify me, to throw me to the wolves. I deserved it. I deserved all of it, and more. Instead, I watched his mouth move, watched him speak for several minutes, while the investigator wrote furiously. Then Marcus did something I never expected. He took full responsibility. I could see it in the way his shoulders straightened, in the resigned set of his jaw. He was falling on his sword. Later, I would read the official statement. There was a personal situation that compromised cockpit security and safety. The fault is entirely mine. I allowed personal matters to interfere with my professional responsibilities. I failed to maintain appropriate boundaries and professional standards, creating a situation that endangered my passengers and crew. He never mentioned my name, never said I forced my way in, never told them I'd touched the controls. In his statement, he took responsibility for allowing an unauthorized person with knowledge of cockpit procedures to gain access during flight, for creating a hostile environment that led to a physical altercation, for failing to maintain control of his cockpit. Because he knew, we both knew, that this was his fault as much as mine. If he hadn't betrayed me, if he hadn't brought his mistress into the cockpit on active flights, if he hadn't destroyed our marriage with his arrogance and entitlement, I would never have been there. Yes, I'd made the choice to enter that cockpit, to let rage override reason. But he'd created the circumstances that led to that choice, brick by brick, lie by lie, betrayal by betrayal. The police car finally pulled away from the tarmac, taking me toward whatever consequences awaited. Behind us, the plane sat like a wounded bird, surrounded by investigators who would spend months analyzing what happened, writing reports, making recommendations. They would find that no permanent damage had been done to the aircraft, that James's quick response had saved everyone. They would commend the crew for their professionalism under unprecedented circumstances. But they couldn't measure the other damage, the nightmares those children would have, the fear that would grip passengers every time they flew, the relationships and trust shattered by 30 seconds of violence. At the police station, they processed me with efficient detachment. Fingerprints, photographs, questions I barely heard and answered mechanically. They kept me in a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and despair, while they decided what to charge me with. Interfering with a flight crew, certainly. Reckless endangerment. Possibly attempted murder, though my lawyer, appointed because I was too shattered to even think about calling one myself, assured me that charge wouldn't stick. I spent that night alone in a cell in Halifax, watching shadows move across the ceiling, replaying those 30 seconds over and over in my mind. If I'd taken a breath, if I'd walked away, if I'd confronted him privately, like a rational adult instead of a woman possessed. If. My phone had been confiscated, but they told me the story was already international news. Pilot's affair nearly causes mid-air disaster. The media had gotten hold of Sienna's name within hours. Someone on the flight had recognized her from her Instagram account, where she posted pictures in her uniform, smiling brightly with hashtags about loving her job and seeing the world. Her account had been flooded with hate, then deleted entirely. She'd lost her job within 24 hours, escorted from airline property by security, before she could even collect her personal belongings from her locker. Marcus was suspended pending investigation, his pilot's license in jeopardy. Best case scenario, he'd never fly commercially again. Worst case, he'd face criminal charges of his own for the security violations and for creating the hostile environment that led to the incident. My lawyer came the next morning, a tired-looking woman named Patricia, who spoke in measured tones about plea deals and mitigating circumstances. "They're willing to be reasonable," she said. "You have no criminal history. You're a respected physician. If you plead guilty to interfering with a flight crew and accept psychological evaluation and treatment, they'll drop the more serious charges." "What about jail time?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. "Probably. But we're looking at months, not years. Maybe supervised release, if we can convince them you're not a danger to anyone." A danger. That's what I'd become. Dr. Rachel Hayes, trauma surgeon, respected member of my community, someone who dedicated her life to saving others. Now I was a danger, a cautionary tale, another person who'd let their pain hurt innocent people. My phone was returned to me that afternoon, after they'd extracted all its data for evidence. It buzzed immediately with hundreds of messages, missed calls, voicemails. I scrolled through them with numb fingers. Messages from colleagues expressing shock and disappointment. Messages from friends asking if it was true. Messages from reporters wanting my side of the story. And one text from Marcus sent at 3 in the morning. "The divorce papers will be ready next week. I won't fight you on anything. It's the least I owe you." I stared at those words for a long time. The least I owe you. After everything, that's what it came down to. An equitable division of assets. A clean legal break. An acknowledgement that we'd both destroyed what we'd built, just in different ways. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. We'd both almost destroyed everything. Him through betrayal, me through rage. In the end, the only crash that mattered was the one we'd already survived. The catastrophic collision of two people who'd once loved each other, now left picking through the wreckage of what remained. The story of Flight 847 would be told and retold, analyzed in aviation safety courses, discussed in articles about cockpit security and human factors in accidents. Our names would be footnotes in those discussions, cautionary examples of what happens when personal lives bleed into professional responsibilities. But for me, sitting in that cell in Halifax, the real story was simpler and more devastating. I'd let 30 seconds of rage define me. I'd let pain turn me into someone capable of risking hundreds of lives. And I'd have to live with that person, with what I'd become, for whatever remained of my life. If you've ever felt rage so consuming it obliterated reason, if you've ever been betrayed so deeply you couldn't see past your own pain, learn from my mistake. Walk away. Take a breath. Remember that your suffering, however valid, doesn't give you the right to hurt others. Because in the end, revenge doesn't heal anything. It just adds your own guilt to the weight you're already carrying, until you're crushed beneath it all.